So good day. We're continuing the Maimer Hechaltzu from the Rebbe Rashab. We're in the middle of chapter 19. We're using the lessons in Hechaltzu, page 156, in the most recent edition, or 151 in the edition before. We're in the middle where it says, Over emes haloi b'shem Hashem yesh boi daladoisius. Moreover, the source of this particularization exists in the name itself. So, just brief background. What the Rashab is saying in this chapter, his position is that the division, the differences that what Chassidus says is called that Malik Kol Almin, the energy of Hashem that pervades the worlds, creates differences. That is the source of differentiation amongst things and people as far as their energy is concerned. Says the Rashab, it doesn't just begin in Hashem Elokim, but it begins also in Shem Hashem, and Yud Kei Vav Kei. What is the Chiddush here? The Chiddush is that normally we think of Shem Hashem being transcendent, and Shem Elokim being kalim, vessels, differences, differentiation, etc. And the Rashab's position is, if it didn't come from Yud Kei Vav Kei, how is it that all of a sudden, pop, there's the differences? It doesn't work that way. Everything has a makar, a source. I always say, if you wish to understand a person and a situation, you have to look at their youth, their background, their history, and when you understand that better, you'll understand what's happening today. You'll understand the person and the situation at hand much better. Or better said, you'll understand it properly. Whereas if you just look at, as we say, there's an expression, it's a kan nimtza, kan hoya. Boop, he pops up, I'm here. Who are you? Where'd you come from? You know? And it's a Western way of thinking is, it's here. In other words, let me live a good day today and not, make believe. Nothing. There was nothing before. The Torah's view is no. There is a Bereshis Bara Elikim, and there's the entire Sefer Bereshis. Why do we have the Sefer Bereshis as the first of the 5 Sfarim, the first of the 5 books? How is that relevant? The answer is because this is who you are. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Rachel, Rivka, Leah, the Ovis, the Emois, all the Geschichten, the Yiddish word, all the episodes that took place with them. It didn't take place; it's taking place. And if you understand that, and of course believe it, then it's a whole different life. And I'm not even talking about religiously and Jewishly. It's a whole different life as a perspective at seeing things. I think I said once, my Zaydel Vasholem, there was a survivor, the Holocaust survivor. He would, when I was growing up, I didn't know about wars and politics. I remember him telling me, he said, Moshe Dayan was the lead general, right, in the 6-Day War. And my Zayda said, you know why he was so successful? Because he knew Tanakh. And he knew from Tanakh the places where the enemy will hide and go, and etc., etc. I don't know if that's the facts or not the facts. I never checked it out. But I remember my grandfather's telling me that. In other words, if you understand history and warfare, and you studied it and you understand it and you live with it, then it helps you today. So that Rashab is using a similar argument to his idea that differentiation and differences of Shem Elikim didn't pop up all of a sudden. Because this is when you go out and you go and said you went to your car and it was storming rain, you could very easily believe here and it's happening now and that's it. It's right now. It's what does it have to do with the past? What does it have to do with the Shem Hashem? What does it have to do with it's so easy to be lured into the now and to forget about the source and all that. So the Rashab says no. If there is distinction in Shem Elokim, it has to begin somewhere. And when it begins in Shem Hashem. That was what he said till now. Now what he's going to do today is show us that in Shem Hashem itself, there is distinction. Let's learn inside. There are 4 letters. V'yadu, and it's known that the 4 letters are madregis, protiois, muchulokis, emizeh. They are specific, distinct levels, one from the other. Over there, klal, in general terms, hadaled oisius, havaya, kailim, hadaled oilamois, atzilus, bria, vasiya. The 4 letters denote, are symbolic of the 4 worlds, which we call the world of God, Atzilus, the world of creation, the world of formation, the world of action. Next page. One second. How is that? Let me read the note. I skipped. Yud ba'atzilus. The Yud is the source for the world of Atzilus. Hey, the first Hey is the source for the world of Bria. Vav, the Vav of the Shem Hashem, is the source for the world of Yetzira. And Hey Achreina, the last one, is the world of Asiya. How is that? Generally, how is that? So it's like this. The Yud is an akuda. It's a point. Atzilus is meloshin etzlo v'samoch. It's near the Godhead. All there is a geometric point in potential. It's the idea. That's why it's the Yud. The Hey is the expansion of the Yud with 3 sides, up, down, and one here, which is demonstrative of the world of creation, Bria, because Bria is not just on the Kuda, there is in potentia, full creation, in potentia. That's Bria. Then there is the 3rd world, Yetzira, formation, where it leaves the state of potentia and it comes into a form. That's the Vav. The Vav begins with the Yud on top, and the Sofer draws it down, draws the line down. Right? That's a Vav. In other words, it's taking from the Nekuda, the Yud, and drawing into the Metachas Ashura, below the line, i.e. the world. Formation. It's a form. And finally, the world of Asiya, the world of action, which, by the way, people make a mistake. They think it means the physical world of action. It doesn't. It's the Ruchnisdika world of Asiya, Isser. You hear that? It's very important. People make this mistake constantly. The last K, the last Hey of the Shem Hashem, is not Asiya Hagashmis, it's Asiya Haruchnis, the counterpart of the physical world in the spiritual realm. Where there, it's not just a Nakuda, it's not just a creation in potentia, it's not the formation of creation, but it's in a spiritual sense, it has all the elements of Asiya, but in a spiritual sense. Let's continue. As the Rebbe Rashab proceeds to explain, the 4 letters of the Shem Hashem represents 4 phases in the transmission of the divine light or vitality. In a general way, these 4 phases are reflected in the 4 realms of existence mentioned directly beforehand. And more specifically, Yeshem, Yesh Shem Havaya B'chol Olam Ma'adal Olam Zatil B'niyat Zira. And the Rebbe says, and more particularly, there is the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei within each of the four worlds. Where B'ha'eses Svira Yishabayla Mahu, you're on page 156, I think, or 57. In the 10 Sviras, in the 10 emanations within each world. What are the emanations, insert? In other words, the world, the Olam, is the abode. The Sviras are the tools to use to access godliness in that realm. If I bring you into a beautiful home versus a home that's not so nice or decrepit, if you don't have tools to understand that and feel it, guess what? It's no difference to you. The appreciation of the location that you're in depends on your seichel and midos.
Might say a home that has furniture in it versus a home that's empty.
Okay, I'll accept that. Good. So it depends on the tools that you have. Let's continue. Yud b'chochma, hey b'bina, vav b'zoh, hey b'malchus. In Kabbalistic terms, the Yud is the source for the spiritual quality called chochma, wisdom. The hey is the spiritual quality of bina, understanding. The vav is the spiritual quality of zeir ampin, which is the 6 emotive traits, attributes. And the first and the final hey is the source for the spiritual character of Malchus sovereignty. Who say that Chochma, who say that Havoy and this is the pattern and the order of descent and flow from the spiritual worlds into the physical world via the 4 letters. The 4 letters of Hashem's name, Havaya, represent 4 stages in the transmission of divine light and vitality within each world. And he explains, Shehem Tzimtzum, okay? Here's the 4 things. Tzimtzum, contraction, is represented by the Yud, he says. I'm going to read the note, it's a long note, so I'm going to read all the notes now. The manner in which the divine energy and life forces manifest in a higher realm is of an entirely different nature than the manner in which it is manifest in a lower realm. Were it to be expressed as it exists in the higher realm, there would be no way it could be grasped within the lower realm. It would be too lofty and would nullify the existence of the lower realm. Therefore, the first stage in the transition that this light undergoes so that it can be transmitted to the lower realm involves contraction, limiting itself so that it can be received and internalized in the lower realms. This is represented by the letter Yud, a small letter whose contracted form reflects the initial transmission of divine energy to a lower realm of existence. The diminutive size of this letter indicates that in the initial stage, the divine life energy is still hidden, that is, beyond the ability of the beings of the lower realm to comprehend. To refer to an analogy frequently used in Chassidus, when a teacher seeks to communicate to a student whose understanding is on a much lower level than his own, the teacher must contract his understanding into one fundamental point. On one hand, this core point represents the fundamental message the teacher wants to communicate. However, it also shares a commonality with what the student can grasp. So the first step is what we call tzimtzum. Now, stage number 2. So the Yud is tzimtzum. Second, the Hey of the Shem Hashem is what we call hispashtus, expansion. And he explains, although the initial stage of transition to a lower realm is contraction alone will not bring about a different phase of existence. You hear that? The divine light and little energy must express itself within the context of the lower realm. The manner in which it takes form with length, breadth, and width is alluded to by the form of letter He. To refer back to the analogy, having established the foundation of the idea that he will communicate, the teacher then builds the form and the shape of his message. He will communicate, finding the terms, examples, and expressions of the idea that the student will be able to comprehend. So this we call hispashtus. Nevertheless, next page. This expansion of the concept within the teacher's mind is still above what the student can understand. It is what the teacher thinks the student will comprehend, not what the student himself grasps. For that to happen, a further process of transition is necessary, as will be explained below. So to return to the parallel in the spiritual realms, the Yud and He are identified with Chochmah and Bina, i.e. intellectual faculties. Intellect is abstract and somewhat withdrawn from ordinary experience. It is theoretical, not actual. Similarly, the divine life force, as it exists in these two stages, is still somewhat above expression within the lowest realm. So therefore, the transition to that realm is accomplished by, and here's point number 3, hamshocha, drawing down, as represented by the letter Vav, a long letter. The shape of the Vav, I mentioned this earlier. The shape of the Vav indicates how the divine life force and energy is drawn down to a lower frame of reference. More particularly, the shape of the Vav begins with the letter Yud, implying contraction, as above. To refer back to the previous analogy, the teacher digests the explanations he thought would be relevant to the student and speaks to the student, communicating them in a short, code-like lesson. This is the fundamental stage through which the divine life energy makes the transition to the lowest realm, extending itself onto that framework of being. And finally, we have the last He. Hispashtus, a second expression of hispashtus, of expansion, as represented by the second letter He, which is identified with Malchus sovereignty. As mentioned above, the length, breadth, and width of the letter He reflect expansion. On this level, the divine light and the life energy becomes expressed within the lower level as it exists within its own context. To speak again in the terms of the analogy, the teacher develops the idea he communicated to the student, explaining it to him at length on his level, according to his faculties, in terms he understands. Rashab says, I elaborate on this elsewhere at great length. Let's continue. What does he elaborate? How the light is transferred and can only be transferred properly through these 4 stages. This is the concept of Esesvira is Chochmah, B'chinas Tzimtzum, Chochmas Tzimtzum, Binu, B'chinas Hispashtus, expansion, Bina's expansion, Kumashis Boy, as we'll discuss further on. And by means of these 4 letters of contraction, expansion, etc., all creatures within that world are created through this process. That's why Hashem's name is called Yudke Vovke, but it reads Havaya, which means the creator, the one who brings into being. For it is this source of tzimtzum, hispashtus, hamshocha, and hispashtus that brings about the existence in a way of from absolute nothingness. Thus, not only does Hashem's name Havaya serve as the source for existence as a whole, you hear this? Not only is it the source in every level of the spiritual cosmos, which we call Seder Hishtalshelus. It is the source that brings the created beings of that realm into being. In other words, there's like this. There's the source of the source. He's saying it's not just the source of the source, kind of. It's the source that brings the particular experience in that particular realm into being. So let's say you're cognizant and you're now in the world of creation. So whatever that means, that's your experience. Your experience is the theoretical ideas of creation and everything that comes along with that. So it's the Yud Ke Vav Ke in that world that makes it possible and real in that world. So the Rashab goes back to his question. And if so, we have to understand what's the difference between Shem Hashem and Shem Elikim. He spent so much time elaborating how there has to be, that there is this division already in Shem Hashem. So his question is, what's the difference between Shem Hashem and Shem Elikim? The Shem Elikim ksiv Lashon Rabbi. Shem Elikim, and he's saying, in other words, what's the difference? And the difference is seen in the fact that Shem Elikim is plural, Rabbim, but Shem Hashem hu echad. Seemingly, if Elokim is Rabbim because of the multiplicity and the differences and differentiation and all of that, it should also be the Shem Hashem, and somehow it shouldn't be Yud Ke Vav Ke just singular. It should be somehow plural. That's his idea. That's his question. Since we already we concluded and brought proof that the differences also begin in Shem Hashem. Here ends his question. Now begins his explanation. You understand? In resolution, the concept can be generally explained this way. The Shem Hashem yesh by pratim madregas. Although Shem Hashem does have particular levels, el shekol madregas sheboy hem v'chinisasachtos galus, but all the levels within it exist in a state of unity and synthesis. There are, right? There's the Minister of Education and Transportation, but all, when they're in the palace and in the room of the king, they are all members of the king. What they feel is king. They don't feel transportation, education, taxes, and everyone tugging for more money for their department. In this boil the Zohar Amiti says scholars. We explained earlier this is the truth synthesis. Kasheribi pratim. When many different particular points, misachdim yachad, when they join together, unified veheim bedavar echad mamish, and they are forged into a single unit. The Shem Hashem, and through this unity that is experienced through the name Hashem, Yud Ke Vav Ke, nasa b'chinas ha'achdus v'iskalus b'hanivroyim shenimtzu v'nesavu. It achieves the synthesis in the beings that are being created into existence. Although they're manifold in distinction, each one to its own tune and rhyme and issue, nevertheless, a unity that pervaded them all and enables each of them to join in oneness with the others, as we'll explain in the following chapters. So I gave you the mashal of how the different ministers are ba'achdos when they're in the chamber of the king, when they're together with the king. Then the achdus supersedes their differences. And if you ask them at the time, who are you? They'll say, we are a representative of the king. They won't emphasize their particular division and program, because that bespeaks of distinction and differences. So in other words, let's take it home to ourselves. The fact that one person has a beard and one person wears a blue shirt and a white shirt, all of these things are differences. But what needs to be felt in Avodas Hashem is the Achdus, that we're all part of the Beida Olam. We're all part of the Beida Olam. And that should supersede the distinctions. And when it does, then the distinctions are more refined, are holier, are more true. I always remind myself, someone who many years, 20 years ago, asked me to learn with him, and I would travel from my house here in Borough Park to Midtown Manhattan for an hour on the train and then back, and then we studied for an hour. And he grew a beard like that if he didn't, fold it up. Well, no, he didn't fold it up. A very long beard. And his wife at the time knew very little. She was Jewish, but she knew very little about Judaism, about Yiddishkeit. And she was more, of the liberal style. And I asked him once, she doesn't throw you out of the house? It's like, this is over the top. You're in Midtown Manhattan, with all these, they lived in the Upper West Side and whatever. I'm just saying, like, so he answered with humility that, because she respects me as a person, she doesn't even kind of see the beard. Of course she sees the beard, And this is so emes in every aspect of life. In the work that I do now, where I write and I tackle, differences. I'm writing now, putting together a book about Torah in America. And I've chosen 8 individuals. And I'm telling you that if you stop and look at the differences, there's like night and day. And disagreements, okay? And in this book, what I seek to do is to find the commonality of all 8. In other words, yes, they were individuals and they had differences and different hashkafas and different shittas, but they brought a common thing to the America during and post-Holocaust, which is Torah, each one in a different way. For the Satmar Rav, it was the Hungarian style of Torah and living like a chassid, in the streets. For the Lubavitcher Rebbe, it was his style. For a Baron Kotler, it was his style, etc., etc. Kitzer, let's just read the Kitzer, then we finish. Shem Hashem hu moked esavas ufrat b'amad eskasya. Shem Hashem is the source of the hidden worlds that emanate from it and reflect its affinity. There are different levels, but they are all synthesized in unity. There's a wonderful, wonderful diagram here that makes it very clear, the 4 letters and the spiritual worlds, the spheres, and the characterized by. It's a very good thing to memorize because it'll be very helpful. Okay, Chevra, we learn tomorrow. Sei mir gesund. Have a great day, everyone. Take care. Bye.